minutes to go.
Okay.
But we've been put live right now, so I'll start.
Sorry.
No problem, Saeed Bhai. We're supposed to go live at 1:15. We're live about 3 minutes early, so I'll just say
we have 3 minutes here. You're right.
yeah. But I'll start off in case people have tuned in, and it's likely that they have. So I'll say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to everyone to another episode, or rather session in the School of the Future, the School of Tomorrow, sort of mega event that Beacon House has organized, and our session is part of Stream 2, and the title is A Balanced Future, a Safer Future. And the topic of this session, the one that I've been quite honored to have been invited to moderate, is Bridging the Digital Divide in Schools of Tomorrow. This is, of course, as current and important an issue as any in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're really excited that there are people watching live, and excited that people are going to be able to see this afterwards as well, because it's also being recorded. We have a fantastic panel, and I'm going to reset and begin again as soon as the clock hits 1:15, just so that we don't have anybody that's missing. I'll make a quick introduction of the panelists, but not a detailed one, and I'm going to try and speak very little. And this, of course, will be a major effort for me. Anybody that knows me knows that I have trouble speaking less. We have a really, really good panel, and I think it's important that we hear all of their voices. The order of the panel, by the way, will be, I will invite Mrs. Kasuri to start. Then I will ask Saeed Ghani, the Honorable Minister for Education for Sindh, to speak. Then I will invite Ulrik Christensen to speak, and I will then invite Michael Sullivan to speak. Each panelist is free to take long, that is 5 to 6 minutes in the introductory sort of round, or they can be real quick. The quicker we are, the more times we'll be able to go back to each of the panelists and make it more of a discussion rather than a set of speeches. So my invitation and appeal would be that we go quickly, so that we keep coming back to each other. But I understand that Saeed Ghani would have prepared sort of notes, and I'm of course keen to hear everyone speak. Now that it's 3:15, I'll welcome everyone once again to the School of Tomorrow, Stream 2, A Balanced Future, a Safer Future. The title of our panel at this important 1:15 time horizon is Bridging the Digital Divide in Schools of Tomorrow. We have a fantastic panel. Alhamdulillah, very, very grateful to Beacon House for organizing the entire conference, especially for organizing this session, and for inviting me to be sitting on the same screen with such luminaries as our distinguished panel. The fact of the matter is that our panelists are sitting in different parts of the world, and rather than one of the punishments of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think this part is one of its gifts, that we can connect with people without spending the jet fuel and leaving the carbon footprint that so many of us tend to do when we're traveling. We have Ulrik Christensen, who's the MD and CEO of Area 9, and has spent a lifetime in learning technology and works on the infrastructure side of bridging the digital divide. We have Michael O'Sullivan, who until recently was the leader and the CEO of Cambridge Assessments International, and of course, this is a assessment system and regime that many of us are familiar with and admire greatly. For the last year or so, he's been offering his advice and advisory input to companies and organizations and governments independently. We are also, of course, honored to have Nasreen Kasuri. She's the founder of Beacon House, and I often say one of the unsung heroes of the Pakistani middle class, because frankly, the urban Pakistani middle class in this country may not exist in the same way if it were not for the educational inputs that she has presided over, whether it's the development of a core of teachers around the country that numbers in the hundreds of thousands now, or the millions of students that have attended Beacon House over the last now, over 45, yeah, almost 45 years. That's right. And finally, definitely not least, but last in the series of introductions is my old friend and somebody who I admire at a personal level deeply, Saeed Ghani. He is a member of the Pakistan People's Party. That, of course, is his only weakness. His many strengths are going to be manifest when he speaks. He is a passionate maker and enabler of change in his home province, in the city of Karachi, and now, thankfully, in the area of education, an assignment in the Sindh cabinet that he should have had many years ago, given his personal commitment and passion for education. And again, I guarantee that viewers will see that come through. I've now spoken not for 5 minutes, but 8 minutes nonstop. Hopefully this is the longest that I would have spoken throughout the session. Excuse me. And don't be alarmed. I'm sitting at a reasonable social distance from Ulrik, who's in Boston and has just celebrated the early Fajr prayers. And Michael, who's in Cambridge, also very far away. Mrs. Kasuri, who is, I believe, in Lahore, also quite far away. And Karachi, closest to my heart, but far away today from where I am in Islamabad. Let's get started with you, Mrs. Kasuri. You have not just the challenge of supporting and enabling the transition of the largest sort of private school company and enterprise in the country from a pre-COVID-19 era to where we are now. The vaccine doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon. So the question of the digital divide, I guess, becomes a much more urgent and pertinent one for you as a leader in the realm of Beacon House, but for you also as a thought leader for this country. How do you think we've done in adjusting to the school of tomorrow today? Because I guess the school of tomorrow landed in this country and around the world the day we realized that COVID-19 is gonna cause us to fundamentally change how we do business.
Mosharraf, we all got thrown into the deep end, as they say. Most of us were not prepared for this. But to some extent, I think Beacon House had done some work on it. If you remember the episode that we had, the Peshawar Public School episode, and all the schools closed down for over a month. At that time, we introduced a program called Beacon House Schooling Uninterrupted. And because we were expecting the schools to be closed for much longer, luckily they opened after about a month or so. So we had some starting point to begin with. But you see, what we can't, and of course, some of our teachers were trained, some of them had to be trained, some of them had to, learn on the job, which a lot of them sort of, rose to the challenge and did. But where we found ourselves helpless was where some of the areas, some of the more remote locations, and in the case of Beacon House, they're not that remote, have challenges as far as connectivity is concerned, internet connectivity and issues of that nature. Then, of course, we all know that there is this electricity crisis. So the electricity goes on and off. So in the middle of your lesson, if the electricity goes off, you lost part of your lesson. So those challenges we all had to face. I was told yesterday that about 18% of our students were not able to access the online lessons. And that was on account of the connectivity issues. Now, this isn't the case of Beacon House, but then you do know that we have another chain of schools with the lower middle class schools, which are in the range of 3,000, 3,500, which are the educators. Now, the situation with the educators was, of course, much worse. I believe about 18-20% students were able to access the thing, and the rest were not able to access it. And the problems were connectivity problems. And then, of course, the other problem, which I'm sure all of you realize, is that if there are 3 children or 4 children in a household, they don't all have their own devices. They could just be one device in the house, or maybe at best 2. But if all of them have to have a device of their own, that becomes a challenge. And so somebody has to miss out. So invariably what happens is that the senior students, the senior class students, are allowed to use that device, or the parents. So that sort of becomes a challenge in itself. Now, these are challenges which obviously we were all aware of. It's not as if they've come to us as a surprise. We're all aware of these challenges, and these challenges have to be met. We have to look upon online schooling seriously for the future. I personally am of the view that education, schooling has to have some sort of a hybrid, blended form. It can't be totally brick and mortar schools or totally online. It has to have a blended, blended sort of a thing, which means that in times of crisis it can sort of move to the more online platforms, and normal times you can have a more blended thing. The blended product gives much better support to the teacher, because there is so much available on the net that it's a lot of support for a teacher. And obviously it makes the lesson so much more interesting for the student also. But there will, for some time, at least in countries like Pakistan, be a divide, because you see the more underprivileged areas, underserved areas, the public schools will have a problem. Will have a problem until the government would have to step in. I won't say that the problems are insurmountable. I think with the right amount of will, political will, those problems can be solved. But the problem that I see, and I've actually discussed it with 1 or 2 people, which may be a little more difficult to overcome, is the fact that most of our families, working class families, live in 1-room houses. Now, if you have 3 children or 4 children who need a quiet space or corner to do their online class, that is a bit of a challenge, a little more difficult, a more difficult challenge. But the other challenges I feel can be met, not easily, but yes, with the right political will, it can be met.
I think it's fascinating insights there, Mrs. Kasuri. I think there's a few things that pop out immediately. Excuse me. Obviously, we have the divide between haves and have-nots writ large in this country, but we also have this public and private sector distinction, and the real distinction, of course, is what I tend to call elite private sector, or more expensive private sector schools versus your generic understanding of public sector schools. Saeed Ghani, you are, of course, presiding over the efforts of the Sindh government to respond to this crisis. There's 2 or 3 things that pop out immediately. One is we've seen a lot of chatter around university education and higher education sort of recipients or consumers of higher education, young people that live in areas where 4G connectivity is limited, or where the expense of 4G is prohibitive. You also have a more fundamental problem in terms of age groups, because younger students require a fundamentally different nature of engagement in terms of the attention of the instructor or the caregiver, and the attention required for students that are above the age of 13 or 14. That fundamental distinction complicates especially the delivery of primary school education, which is probably amongst the largest cohorts of those that you're responsible for. Talk to us a little bit, Minister Saab, about the challenge for you as the person responsible in the great province of Sindh, not just from the distinction between public and private, but also in terms of different age groups and how difficult or complex the challenge has been and how you've tried to overcome it. Saeed Ghani, you might be muted because we can't hear you. No, I still can't hear you. Nahin, unfortunately.
Is this okay?
Yeah. Yes, perfect. Got you now. No, I lost.
First of all, I want to thank Beacon House and Mubashir, to you as well for your kind compliments, except one. And I think this is my strength, not my weakness.
Of course it is. I was teasing you. I apologize.
That was okay. You have the right to say anything. Actually, I don't think this distance learning on the online education system is the alternate of traditional schooling system. But this pandemic, where it is creating a lot of problems in every sector, it has some kind of opportunity as well. Before this pandemic, we never thought about this kind of situation where we can try to find the methods to educate our kids through different methods, like the online system or these YouTube channels or Facebook pages, or like the cable TV through the FMC radio channels. These all options come to our mind after this pandemic. So hopefully we will get out of this pandemic, but we will not leave this the alternate systems of education we started to adopt. So this kind of opportunity, I think, which we have given by this COVID-19, so we can continue and we can face, if any kind of situation like this, we can have this system to connect our children despite of different difficulties. In Sindh province, and I think this is a similar situation in all the provinces. So Pakistan has a large population living in the rural areas where this connectivity is a big issue, and the resources is the other major issue. Right now, initially we have created a YouTube channel for the college students, and till today, more than 1,800 lectures uploaded by our different professors and the lecturers on this YouTube channel, and we have more than 16,000 subscribers. This is not a good number, but this is better if we talk the Pakistani conditions. And we have one app for the children of the KG to grade 5 classes, where they can upload this the app, and they can study the English, Urdu, maths, and science subjects. And we are adding the Sindhi as well. And most probably within the next few days or within a week, we will be able to add the Sindhi as a chapter, as a subject in this as well. And apart from that, with the collaboration of the Microsoft, we have trained around 550 master trainers to have these virtual classes. And as a pilot project, in Karachi, 3 big comprehensive schools, we have already started this. And in next phase, we have planned to start 250 schools. And in the second phase, we'll add 500 more schools in this virtual classing system. But despite of this, I always said this is not the replacement of the traditional schooling system. This is an effort to connect the students. Unfortunately, they are disconnected from this schools and studies since like last 5 months. So if we can connect around 10%, 15% of the students, this is an effort which we can put, and we can increase this percentage from 25%, 30%. I don't think we will be able to reach out 100% students in the province of Sindh, even in the province of Punjab or the KP. We may increase this number up to 50-60% in the urban areas, but I don't think it will be possible to do more than this in even the urban areas. So it is a big challenge. We got the licenses from the Microsoft for 135,000 teachers. Those will be part of our virtual classes, and we also get the licenses for our children's. The separate license for the each student is around 4.5 million students we have in the schools. So we are putting our efforts, and we are also working on a cable TV channel. So it can be because the cable has more reach than the mobile phones and the internet. And then we are also working on the FM radio channel. And we are also talking to the cellular companies to increase their accessibility. And number two, to offer, most probably the priority is to get the free of cost timing for the students, or otherwise the subsidized or the minimum rates for the students who are connecting themselves with these the gadgets. So we are on it, but I still feel, despite of our best efforts, it is still a big challenge to reach the maximum number of students. So hopefully try to get some more opportunities, and we are getting different offers from the different INGOs, different bodies, different companies, and they are offering different methods. So we are looking into it. So hopefully we'll increase the numbers, and we'll come up with the different models as well.
Saeed bhai, forgive me for digging a little bit deeper, but I think it's worth exploring. And again, with somebody like you who has the understanding and the passion and commitment to this issue, I think it begs to be asked. The issue with this notion of the digital divide is that some of us generationally, maybe I include myself in this, maybe belong to an era or a mindset where there was a time when building schools was really important. And so, and of course, I worked on this campaign, and you were so supportive throughout the Alif Elan period, where we were saying, look, there's this many kids out of school. In order to get these kids in school, we have to have enough schools and enough teachers to cater to them. And then a lot of us have thought about that framing. And if we think about the digital divide only in terms of devices or licenses or the hardware infrastructure, including the connectivity or the broadband access, that's maybe thinking about education in terms of providing a school building and teachers that show up at school and furniture and maybe electricity and running water. But it doesn't actually address the fundamental question of education. And of course, I'm going to ask Ulrik and Michael and Mrs. Kasuri to speak on this as well. But talk to me yourself a little bit about what extent of the digital divide do you think is really not about hardware or infrastructure or devices, and actually about the application, which for me, the app in education is always going to be the teacher. Do you feel like the school teachers in Sindh have the capability and have the support that they need in order to adjust to a digital era and an online era? Or do you think that is, if you had to rank that, how important an issue is the ability and the support that teachers have in that list of key issues?
I have just heard that we have the 550 master trainers for these virtual classes. And before this pandemic, we never thought to have these kind of situations where we can think for this distance learning system. We have 135,000 teachers, and I do accept that most of them has no idea how to teach these students through the different methods of this online or distance learning. So we are trying to get them in the system. And these 550, the master trainers, we have around 18 plus in every district. So they will provide the basic training to these teachers to get them some kind of knowledge to connect this. I do agree this is not an easy job, but we are trying our best. But definitely we will need some more new teachers. We we are short about 36,000 teachers. We are going to hire 36,000 new teachers. So definitely this will be a big opportunity to add some additional qualification for these teachers to have some kind of information about these online classes or use these gadgets. So we are trying our best, but as I said, this is not an easy task. This is very difficult, challenging task. And at any time, we won't be able to reach 100% of students through these kinds of gadgets. So we are trying, but in fact, it is not almost difficult, but it is very difficult.
No, I would go further and say it's nearly impossible to adequately respond to the nature of the challenge, because every day I think we're learning new things about the challenge. For example, this distinction. You know, if you are a parent of a 7-year-old who's trying to attend online school, and you're the parent of a 17-year-old who's trying to attend online school, as a parent, you're experiencing two completely different worlds. And speaking of different worlds, Ulrik, you know, you're in Boston, and I mean, I'd love to hear more as to how you ended up in Boston. But I suspect one of the reasons is that technologists or, you know, educationists that are working at the cutting edge of ideas would obviously seek to be near Palo Alto or near Cambridge, Massachusetts, or near where Michael is, in terms of a hub for talent that is global in nature. But when you hear Mrs. Kasuri and the Honorable Minister of Education in Sindh talk about the kinds of challenges they're grappling with, I'm sure you also feel that you're in kind of a two distant world scenario. Talk to us a little bit about how you think about bridging that gap, because the fundamental issues that Saeed Ghani faces are really the same ones that the Commissioner of Education in New York City faces. It's just a numerical difference in terms of access, but in terms of teaching ability, in terms of the capacity of learners to engage through a screen, that's just human nature. So obviously you're working on using human nature to enable the learning experience. Just walk us through what that entails and how the pandemic and the situation we're in today has affected your work.
Yeah, and while you could think that I'm in Boston because of that, we've actually been a truly global organization for 20 years. So I just had to be somewhere in this time zone. So I picked the country, and my wife, who's the real smart person of the two of us, she picked the city. I have the deepest respect for the fact that there is a huge digital divide coming from the challenge that you don't have access to the internet in the first place, or you don't have devices, or as Ms. Nasuri is mentioning, that you're 4 kids in a single bedroom apartment. My expertise lies in what do we do when we have access, and there is a very substantial risk that you'll also see a digital divide that is substantial there, because you if you're just taking the school system as we have today, with synchronous communication between students and teachers, and just putting that online, there are multiple studies that are showing that that's a very, very suboptimal learning experience. I've spent the last 25 years, I started out as a physician trying to understand why do the sophisticated things go bad, like why do doctors and nurses make errors when they get under pressure. And it led back to a 15-year detour into understanding how do we learn things in the first place? How do we actually learn things so we can use them when we are to solve real life problems? And that has led to working everything from kindergarten through how do we educate physicians over the people who are filling the holes on our highways. And one of the things that has been shocking is people learn in very, very different ways. They learn at very different paces. We see up to a factor of 10 differences in even relatively homogeneous groups of learners. Some people learn things in 12 minutes and some people need 2 hours. And our school system is not nearly set up to do that in the current setting. And it gets even worse when we are facing all the challenges that we suddenly in 4 months have realized after we send 1.5 billion kids home, both their parents and their teachers. I think students, parents, and teachers have suddenly gotten a wake-up call, which is school plays a much more important role, but there are also some things that can be done when we are not together, and there are things that cannot be done. One of the things we have believed the last many years, and people have claimed in the marketing drums from both startups and larger players, have been like e-learning was e-learning, but I don't think e-learning is e-learning. I don't think it's the digital part or the E in e-learning that is important. I think it's the learning part of e-learning that is important, and we often forget that because we get blinded or starstruck by VR and AR instead of thinking about what are the real learning science that we can transfer and where we can benefit from the fact that we actually have some opportunities that we normally do not have. The second part that is a big problem is that if we're just trying to replicate what we were doing in the 60s and 70s in the education system, I think we're going to miss out substantially on some of these opportunities. And some of the things we're working on today, both in real life but also in our research lab, is how do we build infrastructures that allows for building the capabilities of both teachers and learners of the future? How do we stimulate and how do we facilitate communication, collaboration, creative thinking, critical thinking, all these things that we know that are necessary for humans to be able to compete with robots and algorithms in the future? How do we build digital infrastructures that allows for that? And I actually do think that if we solve these two problems, if we challenge ourselves to build systems that can handle the differences in how people learn and the paces by which they learn, plus the fact that we actually need to be more ambitious than just trying to see if we can replicate how you get to multiplication tables with digital tools. I think that we may also build in some of that flexibility that is needed when you don't have the perfect logistical settings. As an example, some of the things we're working on today, still in the research lab, but within a year of reaching the market, is what actually happens if you have that family with 4 students that still is brewing in my mind after Mrs. Kasuri mentioned it. I actually think that part of it is that they go out and do something else and maybe just take a picture of it that they then submit, that you may not have to be synchronous online with your teacher, with your peers for 100% of the time. I actually think that would be the wrong way to use digital tools in the future.
This question of that you've explained so brilliantly, Ulrik, of how different individuals learn differently, I think is when people hear it, they think, well, obviously, because people are different. But it's not that obvious, because the traditional schoolhouse education model does not actually cater for that unless you're focused on student-teacher ratios and bespoke engagement and instruction, which some schools are and some schools aren't. Most schools are not designed that way. And certainly when it becomes online, that increased distance complicates it. But Michael, I want to bring this to you, and thank you for waiting so patiently, especially with those headphones on, because at least when I put those on, my ears start sweating. But I suspect that the weather in where you are in Cambridge is slightly better than the horrendous sort of effects of the monsoon season as it approaches here in Pakistan. Here's the question, Michael. You know, we've heard about the generic, sort of public-private divide. We've talked a little bit about the age differentials. We've talked about the challenges in the country's largest private school provider, and the two distinctions there too, even within families, the space issues. We've talked about how challenging it is to manage all this as a minister, and we've talked about different learning capabilities. How does anyone set about the task of designing a system in which the assessment of whether anyone is learning or not caters to all of these specificities, but in particular, the one that Ulrik has talked about, which is different learners learn at a different rate and in a different way? How do we go about designing assessments in the world that we're in today, where we know some of these things that maybe we had assumed didn't exist before?
Well, that's a very interesting question. As you may be aware, assessment has had to move in large parts of the world, including the UK, including, I think, to some extent, Pakistan, over the last few months, from traditional exams to teacher assessment moderated by exam boards in order that this year's students can be graded, despite the problems with organizing exams in large crowded examination halls. I think a lot will be learned from that. That's rather important about teachers' understanding of their students and teachers' ability to grade their students. Not an easy task to get right, but I think the learning from that will help us perhaps prepare for a future where we're a bit less exam-centric in our approach to assessment. But one thing I'd like to emphasize is this, that we shouldn't confuse the emergency response that educators, schools have made to the COVID situation with an e-learning strategy for the future. It's something completely different. Some of the things schools have done have been heroic, but in educational terms, utterly insane. But they still had to do them because you have to allow children to continue learning when they can't go to school, when they can't leave their homes in many cases. What do I mean by insane? Well, you wouldn't, if you had a choice, put teachers who've never been trained to deliver education over a technology interface in front of a virtual classroom. You just wouldn't do it. But we've had to do it and make the best of it. You wouldn't simply take traditional education and do it through a technology interface. It doesn't make sense. What Ulrik says is music to my ears. To make effective use of digital education requires a lot of time and investment in the design of the tools and the training of the professionals who will use those tools. My final point really is about student motivation. What we know about EdTech is that it can both reduce and enhance motivation depending on what you do with it. So we know that in a traditional classroom, a skilled teacher can in fact create motivation on the part of unmotivated students, can in fact adjust learning to the different pace of different students to some extent. And as soon as you take that away, you lose all that. On the other hand, we know from our experience, for example, with computer gaming, that technology can create massive amounts of motivation in young people when designed and deployed with skill. And that's, I think, something we really need to focus on in designing proper virtual education strategies.
How has that been going? You have, Michael, a range of sort of really interesting people that you work with, interesting private groups, governments. You presided over maybe one of the world's most prestigious sort of assessment runners or agencies. How has the last 4 months changed the traditional thinking or conventional wisdom in the assessments area? And I don't want you to be restricted to assessments. I know you bring so much more to the conversation, but I'm using assessments because I think a lot of the debate in a lot of the countries around the world, developing or developed, but a lot of the debate is really centered around, oh no, my kids' O-levels were postponed. What do we do now? And so it's assessment centric. For
Sure.
Saeed Ghani, when he talks in the cabinet or when the federal ministry or the federal government is engaged, their big questions are around the matriculation exams or the FSC or FA exams. The question of whether people are learning or not is really a tertiary or beyond question. Yeah. It's really, are my kids getting to school, and when are their exams, and how are they going to sit in the exam hall? Is there going to be enough distance? But you're dealing with more sophisticated questions. So how's that journey or that transition been?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I think exams sometimes in fashionable circles get a bad press. There are good and there are bad exams around the world. There are some terrible exams, I won't name names, that don't assess anything.
Well, every exam that I've had to sit through is terrible. Everyone.
It depends, yeah. But there are also well-designed exams that actually do, you can evidence that they assess things that you want to assess that are worth assessing. So, for example, it's not true that exams simply test recall of facts. Some do, but exams can test all sorts of skills. They can't test everything, so it wouldn't be a good idea if the London Symphony Orchestra recruited violinists based on a paper examination, or indeed an online examination. So there are limits to what you can assess, but you can assess quite a lot with well-designed examinations. What we've had to do this year throughout the world is take a crash course, jump in the deep end of trying to assess students, in many cases without any exams at all, either on paper or online. Paper exams too dangerous, online exams not yet ready to use. So what you get, teacher assessment. Now, what we'll learn from that, I suspect, is how much teachers know, but also how difficult it is to hand the whole thing to teachers, even with exam boards moderating. I mean, because of understandable anti-exam sentiment, which rears its head everywhere time to time, whole countries have experimented with non-exam assessment in public education. For example, Queensland, Australia, a few years ago, moved all its age 18 end of high school assessment away from exams onto school-based assessment. I think it was a couple of years until they half reversed that policy because it didn't work. The assessments weren't reliable. It's too much pressure on the teachers. So these things aren't simple. My own view is that it would be good for teachers to play a bigger role in assessing students. However, to hand over to teachers the responsibility of deciding, in effect, which university a child can get into based on the grade they give, I think is a very grave step. And probably not realistic. So I think we'll still need some kind of distant, impartial assessment of students, whether it's done on paper or on a screen. I think it's a very much a secondary issue.
So Mosharraf, if I can make a comment here, I think that there is an important distinction to make here between assessments and exams, because exams I think are highly controversial what kind of role they will play in the future. Whereas assessment, I think, is an absolutely necessary thing, and particularly the formative assessment that you use on an ongoing basis to guide what we do in the classroom and in online learning. And I actually, and we have been one of the groups in the world that have worked with the most finely granular kinds of formative assessment, where we use assessment every 30 seconds on average, and have done that with, I think today, over 30 million high-intensity users in particularly American college students, but also physicians. And one of the things we've proven, including one of the projects we have with New England Journal of Medicine's Knowledge Plus group, where we have proven that we can actually have equal or better reliability of a formative system than you do have with the highly calibrated board exams. And we are seeing a similar tradition in other areas where you even have like high consequences or serious consequences if you can do it. So advanced cardiac life support or other areas where American Heart Association has a formative version of their summative test, where you can do it if you do something on an ongoing basis. If you prove multiple small steps that you can do something, you don't have to have the summative test at the end. And the big challenge we have is that the reward for cheating on the summative test is so big. Like if you take the board exam in medicine, which is one of the most grave examples, you answer 500 questions to tell us what you know about 140,000 plus things. So the reward for cheating on those 500 things is enormous. Whereas if you, over time, have to tell us what you know about each of the 140,000 things over the 6-8 years it in reality takes to become a physician, it doesn't matter so much. The reward is almost not there. So what we've seen is that the impact of cheating and the impact of fraud and removing that from the individual teacher who can give one grade that allows that student to come into a certain university is eliminated if you use finely grained formative assessment. So I think that we have to be very careful not to confuse those two discussions.
Absolutely. I think the warning is well taken, and I'm really grateful that you've introduced that distinction, Ulrik. But I also think that one of the fetishes of the digital age is that technology can solve the 0-1 questions. So, you bring up the issue of cheating. Right now, there's at least 100,000 coders sitting awake in the middle of the night somewhere, much like you, Ulrik, maybe further west to you, who are coming up with a solution, like a coded algorithm solution to reducing the chances of cheating, because that's a 0-1 question. But Mrs. Kasuri, I wanted to bring the discussion to you. In a sense, at least for me, including for me personally, Beacon House and you yourself, the distinctive element of what you bring is your teacher. And the teaching experience, the human experience of sitting in a classroom and having a teacher that listens to you differently, that looks at you differently, that is in some cases, a safe place away from home, in some cases a safe place away from the playground, in some cases a safe place away from the street, and the vagaries of those things, and also the safe place both before and after the storm of an exam or an assessment. And again, I respect the distinction, Ulrik, but to me, the question of mental wellness and mental health, which generationally, I think for those of us on this panel, I think we all sort of come from a time and place where mental health was, a little bit taboo and was a problem for the 5% or 10%. But I think if you talk to young people today, which I know all of us do, mental health is a really important part of the learning journey. And I think one of the areas in which, real trauma takes place, even for Gen Xers like me, is the examination hall. Are you at all worried that the thing that mitigates against that, which is the human touch, the human interaction between a teacher and a student, if we fetishize technology too much and rely on what it can do too much, we'll actually be putting young people and teachers at greater risk on issues that are more sticky?
Mosharraf, many years ago, many decades ago, actually, three plus decades ago, when people were beginning to sort of, put their work and their accounts and things on computers, somebody said to me that, if you take your manual accounts and you put them on a computer, you'll just make the same mistakes faster. So it applies to teaching as well, that, if we take the classroom teaching methodology and we put it on the online teaching, I think we've lost the advantage of face-to-face teaching, and we haven't really gained any big advantage in an online teaching environment. We've got to think of different ways of assessment, different ways of teaching when we come online. And the teachers have to be trained. The big challenge in this is to train teachers, because to take a teacher and to train her from the way she teaches in a classroom, to teach her to train online and to have a curriculum and everything all designed, that is a challenge. As far as examinations are concerned, I believe that it should be more like assessments. Yes, exams do cause trauma. It used to cause me a lot of sleepless nights when I was at school and at college. And I'm sure all of us have gone through different levels of stress for our exams. Some have been able to handle it well. Some of us have not been able to handle it well. So, if we can do some form of assessment which takes that stress away, it will be very good. And I feel that a blended learning environment in which you have online teaching, you've got teachers who are trained to do it, and some face-to-face teaching, that sort of an assessment can be managed. And there are all types of tools available nowadays to avoid the cheating element thing. Did I hear somebody talk about the cheating element on online assessment? So the point is that there are all types of tools available, which are, as time goes on, they'll become more efficient. So we can do an online assessment more frequently, so that you don't have one big exam. When I was at school, we had one big exam at the end of 1 year. So that month in the year when you took your exam and the month before that were very stressful. But if you're doing your assessments regularly, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, obviously you take a lot of that stress away. But it's going to require immense amount of teacher training. It's going to require an immense amount of teacher training for teachers to be able to, handle the online teaching.
Mr. Kasuri, I think the question that I have remains a little bit unanswered, if you don't mind. I'm concerned, and I think a lot of people are, that the experience of the classroom, and by the classroom I mean the actual human presence, of the learner and the teacher, and this goes for teacher training as well. There's a degree of fluidity that gets introduced when you have that human interaction that the screen doesn't quite offer in the same way. Do you think that's just an assumption, or do you think there's something to it? Because that would mean that our digital tools have great utility, but they may even get us to 99%, but they won't close the loop fully.
Oh, I agree with that. I feel that the student in the classroom, the student interacting, students learn from each other also, and there are social skills that they learn when they're in the classroom, and there's the competitive element. All those things, we don't want to lose out on all that with our online thing. That is why I advise a hybrid or a blended learning environment. I certainly would not like to see the classroom disappear altogether, because you see, my own children are of course grown up, but I see my grandchildren, and I see them sometimes when they're all sitting together. I see all of them, and it saddens me to see that there's 3 or 4 of them sitting together in a room. Instead of talking to each other, they're all focused on their iPads. They're sort of focus. I don't want to see the coming generation losing their social skills. And in a classroom environment, there's competitiveness, there's the social interactiveness. There are so many other things. You don't want to lose all those. So you'd have to think of a hybrid model.
Great. We are now going to start taking questions, and there's a couple that I think I'm going to go to Ulrik for. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask Saeed Ghani Saab. Saeed Bhai, you have even in this discussion, there's obviously some really important issues that are being talked about, but I also know the kind of day-to-day grind that you have to face. And when we're talking about teachers, it isn't so simple as to suggest that teachers need more support and we need to engage with them, because teachers also, there's good and bad teachers. 99% probably are good, but there are teachers unions that you have to deal with in a group of 135,000. Even 1% is a large number of teachers that are problematic. So, and I suspect it's a little more than 1%. But the point being, when you listen to or engage in a discussion like this, in which we're talking about complicated issues that you can't tweet about. These are not binary issues with a good and evil distinction or a 0 and 1 answer. How do you deal with the nuance of distinguishing and managing so that you treat the issues fairly, but you also don't let bad actors win the day?
For sure, you are right. These are the problems I think everybody is facing. And I have an advantage that being a trade unionist, I can handle them easily. So I have a good experience to talk to them, and they feel that I am a pro-worker and I can understand their issues, and I sincerely try to resolve their issues. So this is an advantage which I have, but I don't think that everybody has this advantage. But despite of these facts, there is issue, and I think you said the 99% teachers are brilliant, but I think this is not 99%. It may be around 60-70%. Those teachers are willing to perform their jobs properly, but otherwise there's a good number. Those always try to avoid their responsibilities. But the advantage we have right now, especially when I'm talking about the Education Department of Sindh, that a lot of these senior teachers are retiring very fastly. So the number the number of the vacancies increasing every year, And as I said, that we have 36,000 teachers, and every year this number is increasing by 4,500, 4,000, 5,000 teachers every year. So we have a good advantage that we can hire better teachers with better qualifications, with a better method. So with the time of around next 5 to 6 years, we will have a good number of good teachers. So then we can, I think, address all these kind of issues. And recently, the teachers hired in last 2-3 years, these teachers are much better than the what lot we have in our stock.
Ghani bhai, there's a number of questions that have come up that I think I should pose to you, because you may be able to answer them better than any of us. One is around whether schools are going to get everyone tested for COVID prior to reopening. Now that's a lot. That's 135,000 tests, even if you just do teachers, not including the AEOs and at the tehsil level or the taluka level, or the students themselves, or the principals, or the district officers. What is the plan for the reopening if September 15 is in fact when schools reopen? What are the key? I know the plan may not be ready yet, but what are the big questions around which you think the plan will be rolled out?
Mosharraf, when you said that everybody will be tested, I think it includes the students as well. And we have 4.5 million students. So right now, in last 5 months, in whole Pakistan, we won't be able to test the 4.5 million of our population. So it is out of question, and this is not possible at any way. So we can test everybody who's coming in the school building. But right now, the decision which was taken in the Inter-Provincial Ministers Committee, that 15th September is a tentative date. It all depends the situation of the COVID. So when we will have another meeting before the 15th of September, it will all depend the what situation will be on that day. So the precautions is the only thing which we can ask everybody to adopt. But to test everyone, and it doesn't mean you test me today, I can not be infected for next 15 days or a month. I can be infected immediately after the test. So when we said the tested everybody means you tested everybody on every day. So this is not possible, humanly not possible.
No, that I think that clarity and that integrity is exactly why I'm such a big fan. Saeed bhai, we only have 6 minutes. I want to go to Ulrik and I want to go to Michael with a couple of these questions. Last question, if you could answer it very quickly, Saeed bhai, which is, it's a couple of people have asked. One is excellent access for learners of urban areas, but what is the plan for rural areas? I don't even agree with the assumption in the question there, but I pose it to you anyway. And then if you are not able to reach every child, what is the way forward for those children? So those are kind of similar questions. Maybe a quick response from you before I go to Michael.
I think I have admitted that this is not possible to reach out every student through these alternate methods. So this is only an option to connect the number which you can maximum can do. So for the students, those are not connected with the internet, we are offering them an offline apps. We are choosing the cable TV network system, and we are also talking to the FM radio channels. So these can be few options. We can provide the facility to the students in the rural areas.
Fantastic, Minister Saab. That was lovely, Michael. I'm gonna give the last word to Ulrik, but I wanted to come to you, Michael, with one of the questions that I think maybe you could shed some light on, and I really appreciate the question. It's a vital question that gets ignored too many times in these conversations. How will we deal with children with learning disabilities, particularly hard to identify and manage disabilities like attention deficit disorder? Any suggestions from a assessments perspective, but more widely as well?
Well, it's an important question, and one that would only be more difficult if we envisaged a future where children won't go to school or won't necessarily go to school. Like Mrs. Kasuri, I believe that schools will continue to be the setting for most education for children between about the age of 6 and about the age of 18. And in fact, public schools have always been about overcoming social economic divides. The digital divide is just the latest version. So provided we invest in our schools, we can craft solutions for technology, for special needs, which we absolutely can't do if we attempt to envisage a future for education where the school and the teacher is not central. The teacher can be enhanced by technology, and that goes for special needs teachers as well, but can't, I think, be usefully replaced by technology.
Thanks, Michael. Your answers have been the crispest and shortest. I really appreciate that. Ulrik, there's a couple of questions that I know that you want to respond to because you think they're really worth engaging with. Go ahead and respond to that. And if we have time left, then I'll just say a quick note of thanks at the end. We have about 3 minutes left. All yours, Ulrik.
Sure. So one of the questions is if we should rewrite the curriculum or we should just merely transfer what we're doing today. And I think the answer is really easy. It's an imperative that we rewrite the curriculum. We use this opportunity to fundamentally change. If you look at PISA 2030 that the OECD is preparing for, as a response to what is the future of work, what is the future of humans, I think that this is a unique chance in history to actually recalibrate what we're doing with curriculum. So I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. It would be a complete missed opportunity if we don't do that. And I actually do think that it's relatively easy. We just need to think about the students with learning disability as an extension of the variability I highlighted earlier, that we have to deal with wide ranges. But I actually think that this is an opportunity also to reach students that we normally don't reach. I've recently received case reports from teachers who are saying, this may not all be bad, because we're actually seeing students we can get to that are very quiet in class. And then when we have these relatively small group sessions online, we actually see them engage in a different way. So I think we should be really careful to not just think that in the past we only had hammers and nails. Now we may have screwdrivers and screws as well. And if we use them appropriately, I think we may actually have a more elaborate future rather than one where we should be afraid of this technology. But I do think it is a combination with teachers and technology and face-to-face in a big blend, as Mrs. Kasuri is saying. I think that is the future for sure, but with another curriculum than the one we had in the 60s.
Ulrik, that is a fantastic summary and leaves me enough time to once again express my gratitude to Nasreen Kasuri, to Michael O'Sullivan, to Ulrik Christensen, yourself, and to you, Saeed Ghani, for being the leader that you are and for taking the time to join us. My thanks to Beacon House for organizing this fantastic conference, and a special shout out and thank you to UBL, one of Pakistan's most important banks that is a co-sponsor and partner in this School of Tomorrow effort. Great thanks to them. It's great to see corporates stepping up and engaging in the important conversations, and this was certainly an important one for me. I hope viewers found it interesting. I hope people who asked the questions felt that at least there was some attempt made to respond to them. Once again, thanks to everyone. Take care of all of yourselves and your loved ones. And thanks to everyone from Nargis as well, who's been our fantastic session manager from Beacon House. Thank you, Nargis Heather. Thank you, Beacon House.
Thank you.